In 1962, a publisher told Stan Lee that readers would never root for a teenage superhero burdened by everyday problems. He published the story anyway, on the last page of a canceled comic. It changed everything. Before comic books existed, Americans devoured two very different kinds of cheap print, and neither one looked like what we have today. In the 1880s, the rotary press made printing so cheap that newspapers could sell for a penny. Publishers needed something to make readers pick their paper over the competition. In 1895, cartoonist Richard Outcault began drawing a bald, big-eared kid in a yellow nightshirt for Pulitzer's New York World. The Yellow Kid was the first comic strip to become a national phenomenon. Within a decade, nearly every major American newspaper carried a comic strip. Visual storytelling had proven it could sell papers. By the late 1920s, strips like Little Orphan Annie, Popeye, and Buck Rogers had become household names, read by tens of millions every Sunday morning. Meanwhile, another cheap format was taking shape. Pulp magazines, named for the rough wood pulp paper they printed on, started flooding newsstands in the 1890s. For a dime, readers got over 100 pages of adventure, romance, or horror. By the 1930s, there were hundreds of pulp titles on sale every month. Both formats had devoted audiences, but they were entirely separate worlds, until a printing salesman in New Jersey had a slow afternoon and a wild idea. In 1933, Harry Wildenberg of Eastern Color Printing realized his presses could fold newspaper comic strips into a small booklet. He printed 10,000 copies as a promotional giveaway. The booklet was called Funnies on Parade. It contained reprints of strips like Mutt and Jeff and Joe Palooka. Procter & Gamble gave them away for free in stores. The giveaway ran out almost immediately. A colleague named Max Gaines pushed to test whether people would actually pay for something like this. The answer would reshape American culture. In 1934, Eastern Color printed Famous Funnies and placed it on newsstands for 10 cents. It sold out. Famous Funnies is widely considered the first American comic book sold commercially. It reprinted newspaper strips, but the format, saddle-stitched, colorful, pocket-sized, was entirely new. Within 2 years, every major publisher wanted in. Reprinting old strips could only go so far. Someone had to create original stories for this new format. In 1937, a company that would become DC Comics launched Detective Comics, an anthology of original stories. The age of purpose-built comic book content had begun. In June of 1938, Action Comics #1 hit newsstands for 10 cents. On the cover, a man in a red and blue costume lifted a car over his head. His name was Superman. Superman sold out, was reprinted, and sold out again. Sales reached nearly 1 million copies a month. Every publisher scrambled to find their own superhero. In May of 1939, Detective Comics #27 introduced a dark, cape-wearing vigilante called the Batman. A second pillar of the superhero genre was now in place. At 10 cents an issue, comic books were priced just within reach of a child's allowance. By 1941, over 1 billion comic books were being sold in America each year, by some estimates. During World War II, comic books followed American soldiers overseas. Publishers printed military editions. Superman, Captain America, and Wonder Woman became symbols of the national effort. By the late 1940s, the superhero craze had cooled. Publishers pivoted to crime, horror, and romance. EC Comics, run by William Gaines, became famous for its gleefully gory horror titles. In 1954, psychiatrist Frederick Wertham published Seduction of the Innocent. He argued that comic books caused juvenile delinquency, linking them to theft, violence, and worse. Wortham's book triggered Senate subcommittee hearings on juvenile delinquency. William Gaines testified. The coverage was a disaster for the industry. In 1954, the industry created the Comics Code Authority, a self-regulatory body designed to ward off government censorship. Publishers who wanted their books on newsstands had to display its seal. The code banned crime and horror in graphic detail. Words like horror and terror were forbidden from covers entirely. EC Comics, unable to survive the restrictions, folded most of its line. Through the late 1950s, comics became safer and blander. Sales declined sharply. The superhero had nearly vanished from newsstands. The medium seemed to be dying. In 1961, Marvel's publisher told editor Stan Lee to create a superhero team immediately. A competing publisher's new team had just outsold everything on the stands. Lee and artist Jack Kirby launched the Fantastic Four in November of 1961. These heroes argued with each other, worried about money, and doubted themselves. Readers had never seen anything like it. Lee and Kirby were violating the genre's fundamental rule. Superheroes were not supposed to have problems. They were supposed to be aspirational. Marvel's gamble was that readers wanted something more real. The Hulk followed in 1962, then Thor, then Ant-Man. Each character carried personal burdens. Marvel was building a world where heroes lived in the same city and sometimes clashed. In the summer of 1962, Marvel's Amazing Fantasy was being canceled. With nothing to lose, Stan Lee pitched a new character for the final issue. His publisher told him it would never work. The character was Peter Parker, a shy, awkward 17-year-old science nerd from Queens, bitten by a radioactive spider. He was not a millionaire. He was not an alien. He had homework. Artist Steve Ditko designed the costume, a full-face mask and web pattern whose posture alone conveyed emotion. The design made Parker's feelings readable without ever showing his face. Amazing Fantasy number 15 hit newsstands in August of 1962, priced at 12 cents. On the cover, Spider-Man swings across a city skyline, one arm cradling a struggling criminal. The issue sold extraordinarily well. Within months, Marvel launched The Amazing Spider-Man as its own series. The character that was supposed to be unpublishable had become the company's biggest star. Peter Parker worked because his problems were recognizable. He missed dates. He worried about rent. He was misunderstood and made mistakes he had to live with. No hero had been written that way before. Marvel's success relaunched the superhero genre entirely, triggering what historians call the Silver Age of comics. DC reimagined older heroes. The medium had been revitalized from near death. By the mid-1960s, Marvel comics were being read in college dorms. Stan Lee was giving campus lectures. A medium once dismissed as children's disposable entertainment had earned genuine cultural respect. Through the 1970s, the Comics Code began to loosen. In 1971, Marvel published a Spider-Man anti-drug arc that technically violated the code. The code revised its rules shortly after. The 1980s brought independent publishers and direct-market comic stores. Comics could now reach adult readers without passing through newsstand distributors who feared controversy. Frank Miller's Batman and Alan Moore's Watchmen in 1986 argued that comics could carry genuine literary weight. The graphic novel had arrived as a serious form. Marvel filed for bankruptcy in 1996, but emerged reinvented. In 2008, Iron Man became a global phenomenon. Spider-Man had already starred in 3 major films before that. Every one of those billion-dollar films traces back directly to a cheap newspaper strip, a printing salesman's slow afternoon, and a 10-cent booklet that sold out in a New Jersey grocery store. Spider-Man is a story about ordinary people receiving extraordinary power. But the comic book that carried him is a story about cheap technology meeting the right idea at exactly the right moment. The comic book survived government hearings, a code that nearly strangled it, and the near death of the superhero genre. Every time it was written off, someone with nothing to lose tried something new. This is Origins. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. There's a new origin every single morning.